The sudden detection. Emerges Empire. The space station Tesseran was quiet, far from the bustling sectors of the galaxy. Floating in the remote reaches of the Orion cluster, it served as a monitoring post, gathering intelligence on the strange, unknown corners of space. The crew of Tesseran had grown used to the silence, only the hum of the station's machines breaking the stillness of the void outside. There was no reason to expect trouble. Not here. Not so far from the busy trade routes and dense, inhabited sectors. But today, something was different. The first sign came in the form of an alert. A sharp, shrill tone that cut through the air like a blade. It wasn't the usual ping of a satellite report or the soft buzz of a routine data transmission. This was an emergency. A quick glance at the monitor showed a blinking red dot. An unfamiliar ship had been detected, appearing from nowhere in the deepest, most uncharted regions of the sector. Lieutenant Mary Yellen was the first to respond. She had spent the last few years at Tesseran, analyzing everything that came through the sensors. She was used to the quiet, to the slow pace of life out here. But as she stared at the monitor now, her fingers froze over the keys. This wasn't supposed to happen. "Commander Jax, you'd better take a look at this," Mara called, her voice tight with uncertainty. Her eyes were wide as she scanned the data. The ship was massive, larger than anything the station had ever recorded. Its design was strange, with sharp edges and a sleek, almost alien-like profile. There were no registration numbers, no markings to identify it, no traces of known technology. Commander Jax, a seasoned veteran of countless space encounters, walked over with a slow, deliberate pace. He looked at the screen and instantly felt a knot form in his stomach. He had seen many ships, both friendly and hostile, but nothing like this. The readings were baffling. The ship wasn't broadcasting any known signals. It didn't even have a proper transponder. Yet it was there, drifting steadily toward them. The sensor readings confirmed it. This was not some rogue space debris or a malfunction in the station's equipment. "What are we dealing with?" Jax muttered, squinting at the unfamiliar data. He knew that if this was a new kind of technology, if this ship was an uncharted craft, it could be dangerous. But there was one thing that kept running through his mind. This ship wasn't just unknown, it was human. "Sir," Mara said, her voice a little shaky, "I think we're dealing with something human. This ship's structure, it's like nothing I've ever seen before, but the signals, there's something familiar about them." Jax's expression hardened. The last time a human warship had been reported in this sector was decades ago. And that was before the Great War ended, before Earth had officially closed off its deep space military operations. Everything was supposed to be peaceful now. Humanity had left behind its old methods of war, or so they thought. But this was a stark reminder that not everything was as it seemed. "Can you get a visual?" Jax asked, his tone still steady, but his mind racing. He hadn't seen a human ship in years, and the possibility of one drifting out in this sector made his skin crawl. Mara didn't respond immediately. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, activating the visual systems. After a moment, the screen flickered, and a grainy image appeared. At first, the ship was just a distant shadow against the backdrop of the stars. But as the station's telescopic systems zoomed in, the silhouette of the warship became clearer. It was unlike any human warship the station had recorded. The ship had smooth, curved lines that made it seem almost sleek, like a predator in space. Its surface shimmered with a strange energy, and its sheer size dwarfed the station. It didn't seem to be a part of any known fleet, yet it exuded a sense of authority, like it was built for a purpose, and that purpose was something far greater than a simple reconnaissance mission. "What the hell is this?" Mara whispered, unable to take her eyes off the screen. Her fingers were trembling slightly, a reaction she wasn't used to. "We need to know more," Jax said, voice low and commanding. He turned to the station's communication officer, Lieutenant Callan. "Send out a standard hail. Get them to identify themselves." Lieutenant Callan nodded, and quickly set to work. The communications array hummed as it sent out a signal to the unknown ship, requesting identification and confirmation of the ship's intentions. Minutes passed. The silence on the station seemed to grow heavier, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. No response came. "Did you get a reply?" Jax asked, his voice now tight with impatience. Kalen shook his head. "Nothing, sir. It's like they're not even receiving us." The crew exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't just an unknown ship. It was silent. It wasn't responding to anything. Jax's mind raced through the possibilities. The ship could be a trap, a test of some kind. Or maybe it was a rogue faction from Earth that had decided to reassert itself in this forgotten corner of the galaxy. Either way, one thing was clear. Whatever this ship was, it wasn't here by accident. Jax stood up straight, a sense of determination sweeping over him. "Get the shields online. All crew to battle stations. We may be dealing with something much bigger than we thought." As the crew scrambled to prepare, the warship continued its slow, steady approach. The mystery of its origin and intentions loomed large over Tesserine Station, but one thing was certain: this wasn't a simple detection. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous. And the crew of Tesserine was about to face a threat they never expected. The unsettling silence. As the tension in the command center grew, the crew of Tesserine scrambled to respond to the unknown warship's appearance. Jax stood at the head of the room, watching the flickering screens, his mind racing through every possibility. No one had expected this kind of threat. An unknown, silent ship drifting through a sector that had been peaceful for decades. The whole situation felt wrong, and Jax couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at him. The station's comms officer, Lieutenant Kellen, adjusted the controls, trying once again to make contact. Each transmission sent out felt more desperate than the last, but the result was always the same. Silence. "Any luck?" Jax asked, his voice now tinged with frustration. "Nothing, sir," Callan replied, his face pale with worry. "It's like they don't even hear us." Mara, who had been tracking the ship's movement with one of the auxiliary monitors, turned to face Jax, her expression growing more tense by the second. "Commander, it's not just that they're not responding. The ship, it's changing course. It's moving closer." The ship, which had initially appeared as a distant shadow against the stars, now loomed larger on their screens. Its massive frame dominated the view, moving steadily toward the station. The crew felt an uncomfortable chill as the ship's cold presence seemed to fill the room, despite the fact that it was still far from them. "It's getting too close. We can't ignore it anymore," Jax muttered, pacing the command deck. He glanced back at Mara. "Can you get a closer scan on it? We need to know what we're dealing with before it's too late." Mara worked quickly, pulling up additional sensor readings. The ship's size was indeed much larger than anything the station had seen, but it wasn't just the sheer scale that made her uneasy. There was something off about the ship, something that didn't belong. "It's like it's made of something different," Mara said, confusion creeping into her voice. "It's smooth, almost organic, but there's no sign of any living material." "Could it be alien?" Callan asked, his voice low, barely audible over the hum of the equipment. Mara hesitated, shaking her head. "No. If it were alien, the ship would be, well, different. The readings are too familiar, but it's not human either. This is something in between, something we can't quite identify." The room fell silent as the realization set in. They weren't facing an alien invasion. They were facing something else entirely, something human, but still foreign and unknown. Suddenly, a low, rhythmic beeping broke through the quiet tension. Mara turned quickly to her station. The ship was still coming closer, but now a new signal was appearing on the monitors. It was faint, distorted, but unmistakably a transmission. Jax's eyes narrowed as he studied the flickering code on the screen. "Is that a signal?" "Yes," Mara confirmed, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and dread. "It's coming from the warship. But it's not like any standard transmission we know. This is old, ancient, almost. Jax didn't need to hear more. He ordered the comms officer to boost the signal and filter out the noise. After a tense few moments, the static cleared, and a voice, weak but clear, broke through. "Humanity will not be ignored," the voice said. The words sent a cold shiver through the crew. The voice was calm, almost too calm, and the words were filled with a weight that none of them could comprehend. Who was speaking? What did this mean? And why had they been chosen to hear this message? Jax took a step back, trying to process what had just been said. He knew one thing for sure. The warship wasn't here to establish peaceful contact. This message was a declaration. But a declaration of what? "Sir," Mara said, her voice shaky. "The ship's moving again. It's targeting the station. Shields air." Before she could finish, the lights in the command center flickered briefly, followed by the deep rumble of the station's shields coming online. The massive warship was now directly in their sights, its imposing form filling every screen. Jax's heart raced as he barked out orders. "All personnel to battle stations. Get the defenses ready. Now." The crew sprang into action, but even as they prepared for what seemed like an inevitable confrontation, a terrible truth began to sink in. They weren't just facing an unknown threat. This warship wasn't a random encounter. It had a purpose. And whatever that purpose was, it was not something the crew of Tesseran was ready for. As the station's lights dimmed slightly in response to the power surge, Jax glanced once more at the monitor. The mysterious warship loomed ever closer, its sleek hull reflecting the distant light of the stars. It was almost as if the ship itself was alive, as if it was watching them. "What do we do now?" Callan asked, his voice barely a whisper, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone in the room. Jax didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the ship on the screen. The words from the transmission echoed in his mind. Humanity will not be ignored. The warship wasn't just here to pass by. It had come for something. And the crew of Tesseran was about to find out exactly what that was. The human factor. As the warship continued its slow, steady approach toward Tesseran Station, the crew was on edge. The silence in the command center was suffocating, with only the soft hum of the station's machinery breaking the tension. Jax stood at the front, his hands clenched tightly behind his back as he stared at the monitor. The ship was now so close that it seemed to fill the entire view, casting a dark shadow over the station. Mara continued to monitor the ship's movements, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's coming in fast now, Commander," she said, her voice tight. "We'll be within firing range in less than an hour." Jax didn't respond immediately. His mind was racing, piecing together the fragmented information they had. The warship was clearly human, or at least of human design. Yet it was like nothing the crew had seen before. Its sleek, almost organic shape didn't match any known fleet or military design. Its systems were completely different, more advanced, but still carrying traces of humanity's signature technology. "Can you get a closer look at its markings?" Jax asked, turning to Mara. Mara hesitated for a moment, before adjusting the station's imaging system to zoom in on the ship. "I've been trying, sir, but it's almost as if the ship's surface is shifting. The closer we get, the harder it is to focus on any details. It's almost like the ship is adapting to avoid being fully scanned." The implications of that were chilling. A ship that could actively block scans or alter its appearance. That suggested advanced technology, perhaps technology beyond what Earth's military had ever developed. But if that were true, then why hadn't the crew ever heard of it? Why had humanity left this ship, this entire mission, behind? "Lieutenant, get me an analysis of the ship's power signature," Jax ordered, pacing back and forth. He needed to understand more, and the clock was ticking. Lieutenant Callan tapped furiously at his console. The power levels coming from the warship were staggering. "Commander, this is unlike anything I've seen. The energy output, It's as if the ship is running on an entirely different source of power. It's massive, and it's growing stronger by the second. Jax's mind raced with the possibilities. If the ship had such powerful energy sources, it could wipe out Tesseran Station in minutes. But that didn't make sense. If the warship was here to destroy them, why hadn't it already attacked? It was playing with them. And that fact, more than anything, sent a cold shiver down his spine. Could this be a part of some lost human fleet? Mar asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. Jax turned to face her, his expression grim. That's the most likely explanation. We thought humanity's deep space fleets were all accounted for, that they had disbanded years ago. But what if there was a group that never returned? What if this ship was part of a mission we forgot about? The thought hung in the air like a heavy weight. A lost fleet, forgotten by history, drifting somewhere in the vast reaches of space. It wasn't a comforting thought, but it was the only one that made sense. There had been rumors of human expeditions that vanished without a trace. Missions launched during the early days of Earth's exploration beyond the stars. The idea that one of those ships had survived and had now returned, hidden in the dark corners of space, was too much to ignore. As Jax processed the possibility, Mara's voice cut through his thoughts. "Commander, I'm getting something else. A transmission. But it's not from the warship itself." "Where is it coming from?" Jax asked, his pulse quickening. Mara's fingers danced across the controls as she tracked the source. "It's coming from within the ship. Somewhere. Inside. But there's a problem. It's encrypted. And this encryption, it's old. Really old." Jax narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean by old?" "I mean this encryption is from humanity's first deep space fleets. It's ancient technology, long abandoned," Mara said. "This is a message from a time before the war, from a time when humanity's military might was at its peak." Jax felt a chill crawl up his spine. The ship was sending out a message, one that had been buried in the ship's systems for centuries. This was a relic from humanity's past, a time they had left behind, but a past that now seemed to be reaching out from the darkness. "Play the message," Jax commanded. The screen flickered, and a distorted voice filled the room. It was low and mechanical, the words stuttering as they came through. But one thing was clear. This wasn't a message meant for the crew of Tesseran. This was a message from a different time. "Humanity will not be forgotten. We were sent to protect you. We are your last hope." The voice cracked with static, but the meaning was unmistakable. The Empire is awakening. The war is not over. The message cut off abruptly, leaving only the eerie hum of the station's equipment in the silence that followed. The words echoed in the room as if they had a life of their own. The Empire. Could it be referring to an old human military faction? And what was this talk about a war that wasn't over? The crew exchanged uncertain glances. No one had expected something like this. A war, long buried in history, resurfacing through a ship that had apparently been lost for centuries. "Commander, we need to act fast," Mara said, her voice urgent. "If this ship is part of some kind of reawakening, we could be looking at a much bigger conflict than we imagined." Jax nodded, his mind already calculating their next move. The warship's appearance wasn't just a random event. It was a sign. Whatever was coming, whatever had awoken after all these years, was far from over. A hidden truth. The room fell into a heavy silence after the message cut off. The crew of Tesseran Station exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond to the chilling words they had just heard. The Empire is awakening. The war is not over. Jax stood frozen in place for a moment, his mind racing. He had always thought of the past wars as ancient history, forgotten conflicts that had no bearing on the present. Humanity had moved on, prospering in peace, or so they thought. But now it was clear that some part of the past had survived, lurking in the shadows, waiting to reemerge. He turned to the crew. "We're not just dealing with an unknown warship. We're dealing with something much bigger. This ship wasn't meant to find us. It came here. It wants us to find it. Commander, what do we do now? Callan asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. Jax exhaled sharply, trying to focus his thoughts. First, we need to understand what this empire is. If the war isn't over, that means there's a bigger enemy we're not seeing. This ship is a warning. But who's it a warning to? Before anyone could answer, the ship outside the station seemed to shift, its massive frame moving in a pattern that sent a jolt of panic through the crew. It was no longer drifting. It was positioning itself. Mara's fingers flew over her console. Commander, the warship is. It's aligning itself with the station's coordinates. It's like it's waiting for something, or preparing for a confrontation. Is it going to attack? Jax asked, his tone sharp. I can't say for sure, Mara replied, scanning the energy readings. But whatever it's doing, it's not making any hostile moves. Yet. Suddenly, the station's sensors flickered. The mysterious warship was still silent, its engines barely humming as it positioned itself just outside the range of the station's weaponry. But there was something in the readings, a strange, unfamiliar energy signature that didn't match anything the crew had encountered before. Jack stepped forward, narrowing his eyes as he examined the readings. This isn't just power, it's something else. Sir, Mara interjected, her voice filled with both awe and concern. I think this ship is tapping into some sort of energy that we've never seen before. It's like it's drawing power from somewhere far away. Jax's heart raced as he connected the dots. The ship wasn't just an ancient relic. It was somehow tied to a larger network, one that spanned far beyond this sector. And now, this network was beginning to activate. Where is it drawing power from? Jax asked, his voice thick with concern. It's not a local source, Mara replied, adjusting the sensor focus. It's planetary, far away, deeper in the galaxy. Jax's thoughts raced. A planetary power source. That could mean any number of things, but the most pressing concern was the sheer scale of it. If this ship was tapping into something so vast and hidden, it could be signaling the return of the Empire, the forgotten military faction humanity had abandoned long ago. The question was, who or what was this Empire, and what did it want? Before Jax could process the next steps, the comms officer, Callan, spoke up, his voice low and hesitant. Commander, I'm receiving another transmission. This one's not coming from the warship. Where's it coming from? Jax asked, immediately on alert. It's coming from a nearby relay station. It's on a frequency that matches one of our own, but it's been dormant for centuries. It's like the message has just woken up. Jax's pulse quickened. Play it. The voice on the other end was distorted, but unmistakably human. To all surviving units, the Empire awakens. The war is not over. Our return is inevitable. We are coming for you. The message was cut off abruptly, leaving only the hum of static behind. The implications were staggering. Whoever had sent that transmission was confirming what the crew had feared. This war, buried in the past, had never truly ended. And the worst part was that the Empire had been waiting. It had been lying in wait, building its power, preparing for its return. Mara's voice broke through the heavy silence. Commander, I think the warship's not just here to warn us. I think it's recruiting. Jax turned to face her, his mind reeling with the revelation. Recruiting for what? For a war, Mara said, her voice shaking. A war that we were never supposed to know about. A war that has been going on for centuries. Jax felt a chill run down his spine. The war that had been forgotten. The war that had always existed beneath the surface of humanity's peace. The war was coming back. We need to contact Earth, Jax said, turning to Lieutenant Callan. We need to know what's happening back home. The Empire can't just remain in the shadows forever. As the crew worked quickly to establish communication with Earth, the mysterious warship hovered outside, waiting, silent, as if it knew the answers to the questions they still couldn't fully grasp. What was this empire? Why had it remained hidden? And most importantly, what would happen when it finally came to claim its forgotten legacy? The confrontation. The tension in Tesseran Station was palpable. Every crew member worked with a sense of urgency, eyes flicking between their monitors as they tried to make sense of the strange events unfolding around them. The warship, still silent and ominous outside, loomed like a dark cloud waiting to burst. Jack stood in front of the main console, his gaze focused on the screen that displayed the massive vessel in front of them. It hadn't moved any closer, yet the atmosphere was charged, as if it were preparing for something. The crew had managed to establish a fragile communication link with Earth, but the transmission was weak, distorted by the ship's powerful interference. What they had received so far wasn't enough to understand the full scope of the situation. "Commander," Mara called out, her voice sharp with concern. "The warship's energy output is spiking again. It's charging something. It's not just power. It looks like it's preparing weapon systems." Jax's stomach dropped. The realization hit him hard. They were no longer in a waiting game. The warship was preparing to strike, and the crew of Tesseran Station had no way of defending themselves against the overwhelming firepower it could unleash. "We need to get the shields at full power," Jax ordered, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. "Callan, get us the best possible communication with Earth. I want a report on everything. All the intel we can get." As the crew scrambled, Jax turned to Mara. "Is there any chance we can talk to them? Make them stop?" "I've tried everything I can think of, sir," Mara replied, her face a picture of frustration. "This ship's systems are unlike anything we've ever encountered. If they're even listening, they're not responding to us." Jax stood still for a moment, watching the monitors flicker, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just a confrontation with a rogue ship. It was a confrontation with a part of humanity's dark past, one that had been waiting for the right moment to reemerge, a part of humanity that had never really disappeared. "Prepare for the worst," Jax said grimly. "We'll have to fight if they come after us." The ship outside didn't give them time to prepare for much longer. Without any warning, a strange hum filled the air, and the station's sensors went haywire. The warship's energy signature surged, and then, in an instant, a blinding light shot from the ship. A massive, concentrated beam of energy raced toward Tesseran Station with terrifying speed. "Shields up," Jax shouted, his voice booming across the command center. There was a loud crash as the station's defensive systems tried to intercept the beam, but the force of the attack rattled the entire station. Lights flickered, and the crew braced themselves as the blast collided with their shields. The energy pulse pushed the station backward, shaking everything inside like a giant's fist. The shield held, barely, but the blow had taken a toll. The station groaned under the pressure, and alarms blared, signaling critical damage to several systems. "Status report," Jax barked. "We've lost power to Deck 12. Callan replied quickly, his fingers flying over the controls. "Hull integrity is holding, but we've got multiple system failures across the station. We're operating at 60% capacity." Mara was already working frantically at her console, trying to stabilize their systems. "The warship's preparing another blast. It's charging. We won't have long before the next one hits." Jax's mind raced. There was no way they could continue to take these kinds of hits. Their shields wouldn't hold for long. They had to find a way to stop this before it escalated into a full-scale war. "We need to get them to stop," Jax said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Is there any way to communicate with them again? Any chance they'll respond to a direct order?" Mara hesitated. "I think I might be able to bypass their encryption system, if I can get close enough to their comms relay." "Do it," Jax commanded. "We don't have much time." As Mara worked furiously, the warship fired another blast, this time striking the station's outer hull. The impact sent a shockwave that threw the crew off balance. For a moment, everything seemed to stop, suspended in time. Then, The sound of Mura's voice cut through the tension. "I've got it. I've overridden their relay. We have a direct line to their control systems now. I'm sending a message." Jax watched as she typed quickly, sending a final desperate transmission to the warship. The message was short, commanding. "This is Tesseran Station. We are humanity. Cease your attack." They waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. The warship's silhouette remained unchanged, still looming outside their station, the energy readings growing stronger with every passing second. Then the transmission came through. A crackling voice filled the command center, distorted but clear enough to understand. "Humanity will not be ignored. This is your last warning. Stand down or face the Empire's wrath." The message sent a chill down Jax's spine. The ship wasn't here to negotiate. It was here to enforce the return of the Empire. Jax felt the weight of their situation crash down on him. They had no choice now. They were in a fight for their survival. The warship was not going to stop, and whatever the Empire was, it was coming, and it wasn't going to show mercy. "Ready all weapons. Prepare for a full assault," Jax ordered, his voice firm. The crew braced themselves. The confrontation had begun. The shocking twist. The warship's final message hung in the air, like a threat that refused to be ignored. Stand down or face the Empire's wrath. Jax's mind raced with the realization of what that meant. This wasn't just a random encounter. It was a prelude to something far bigger. The Empire was real, and it was awakening after centuries of slumber. And it wasn't just targeting Tesseran Station. It was after all of humanity. The station's alarms blared once more, the deep thrum of power surging through the systems as the warship prepared for another strike. The shields flickered, damaged from the earlier attacks, barely holding up under the relentless assault. The crew scrambled to repair the systems, but it was clear that they couldn't withstand much more. "Commander," Mara called out urgently, her fingers flying across the console. "The warship's not just targeting us. It's sending out a signal, another transmission. It's not just directed at us. It's broadcasting to the entire sector. They're calling for reinforcements. The Empire is rallying its forces." Jax's blood ran cold as he processed her words. The warship wasn't just a single vessel. It was the tip of the iceberg. The Empire, whatever it was, had been waiting for this moment. And now it was calling in more ships. More power. "Can we stop the signal?" Jax asked, his voice steady despite the growing sense of dread inside him. Mara shook her head. "It's encrypted beyond anything we can crack. The transmission is spreading across multiple frequencies. If the Empire is out there, this could reach a whole fleet." "Then we have no time to waste," Jax said, his decision final. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. If we don't make it out of here, we have to at least buy enough time to warn Earth." The station groaned again as another blast from the warship hit the weakened shields. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the lights flickered again. The crew braced themselves, knowing that each second counted. Jax quickly surveyed the damage. It was clear they weren't going to hold out much longer if they didn't act fast. Suddenly, the hum of the warship's engines grew louder. A new signal flared up on the scanners, a small blip, almost imperceptible against the vastness of space. But Jax knew better. Something else was coming. Something was emerging from the warship. "What is that?" Callan asked, his voice rising in panic as the blip became clearer. "It's a smaller craft, but it's coming fast. Too fast." Before anyone could respond, a smaller ship detached from the warship, speeding toward Tesseran Station with terrifying speed. It was sleek, agile, and far faster than anything the station's defenses could handle. Jax watched as it closed the distance, the light from the warship casting an eerie glow over the small craft. Mara's eyes widened in horror. "That's not a scouting ship. That's a boarding ship." Jax's heart raced as he realized the terrifying truth. The Empire wasn't just planning to wipe them out from a distance. They were preparing to board the station, capture it, perhaps, or destroy it from within. "We need to get to the docking bay," Jax ordered, his voice grim. "They'll breach us within minutes. Get the crew to safety and prepare to defend the station. Everyone else, get to the weapons." The crew rushed to their stations, preparing for what could very well be their final stand. Jax and Mara headed for the docking bay, their footsteps echoing through the halls of the station. The ship was closing in, its hull glistening in the light of distant stars, growing closer by the second. They reached the bay just as the smaller craft made its final approach. It was barely a dot in the vast expanse of space, but its speed was undeniable. As it neared, Jax could see the telltale signs of advanced weaponry. The ship was ready for a fight. And then, with a sudden burst of light, the smaller craft deployed its docking claws. The bay doors groaned as they began to open, and a blast of cold space air rushed in. It was too late to stop it now. The smaller craft slipped inside, its sleek design allowing it to fit perfectly into the bay. The blast doors closed with a resounding thud, trapping it within. "Lock down the station," Jax shouted as he sprinted toward the control console. "We cannot let them get any further inside." Mara rushed to assist him, but the reality of the situation was sinking in fast. They were fighting not just for their station, but for their very lives. The Empire wasn't just a memory. It was a force, a power, that was now making its move. The countdown to breach had begun. Suddenly, another transmission came through. The voice distorted and cold. "This is only the beginning. The Empire has returned. You cannot stop us." The voice faded, but the words echoed in Jax's mind. This wasn't just a small incursion. This was the beginning of a full-scale war. The Empire was rising, and humanity had no idea what it was about to face. The hidden enemy. The warship's breach into Tesserine Station wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a nightmare the crew could barely comprehend. As the smaller craft settled into the docking bay, the lights flickered, casting long shadows through the hallways of the station. The faint hum of machinery now seemed like an ominous reminder of just how alone they were. Outside, the massive warship loomed, its energy pulsing through the darkness of space like a heartbeat, relentless and unyielding. Jax's thoughts were racing, but there was no time to think. The countdown was ticking, minutes before the first wave of soldiers would board the station. Their chance of survival was dwindling with each passing second. The Empire had awoken. And now, they were coming for them. "Commander, we've locked down the docking bay," Mara reported, her voice steady despite the panic creeping into her chest. "But they've already breached the inner doors. They'll be here any minute." Jax's mind worked quickly, trying to piece together their options. The station's weapons were inoperable, damaged from the earlier bombardment. The shields were down, and the station's hull was weakened. They were cornered. "We can't stop them if they're already inside," Jax said, his voice grim. "But we can delay them. We need to make sure they don't reach the core systems. If they take control of the station, it's over." Mara nodded, her eyes scanning the monitors for any sign of movement. "We'll need to set up barricades, force them into the lower levels. We'll fight them on our terms, not theirs." Just then, a loud, echoing clang rang through the station's metal corridors. Someone was coming. The sound of heavy boots, the low hum of combat suits, and the unmistakable sound of weapons being drawn filled the air. The Empire's soldiers were here. Jax and Mara rushed to the nearest control panel, sealing off the main hallway as best they could. But they knew it was only a temporary measure. The soldiers had technology unlike anything they'd seen. They could bypass the station's security with ease. "We can't hold them off forever," Mara said, her voice filled with urgency. "We need to find out where this Empire came from. If we don't understand them, we won't have a chance." "We'll have time for answers later," Jax replied, his eyes narrowing as he heard the sounds of combat growing closer. For now we fight. We buy as much time as we can. The first of the Empire's soldiers appeared at the far end of the hallway, clad in sleek armor that shimmered with an unnatural glow. They were human, just like the crew. But their eyes were cold, their movements precise, as if they were machines themselves. They carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy, and they advanced without hesitation. The station's crew opened fire, their weapons flaring with a brief burst of light. But the Empire soldiers barely flinched. They raised their own weapons, and in a split second, the crew's shots were deflected by an energy shield surrounding their attackers. It was a brutal reminder of the Empire's superiority. "We need to fall back," Jax shouted, pulling Mara behind him as the first wave of Empire soldiers began to push forward. They had to get to the control center. If they could take it back, they might be able to send a distress signal to Earth, warn them of what was coming. The station's corridors became a battlefield, with the crew fighting valiantly but hopelessly against the overwhelming force of the Empire. Jax could hear the sounds of skirmishes echoing down the halls, the cries of his crew mingling with the steady rhythm of enemy boots. Despite their resistance, the Empire's soldiers pushed forward, relentless. They were everywhere, moving like shadows, sweeping through the station like a tidal wave. The crew was outmatched, outgunned, and the odds of survival were slim. But Jax wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "Get to the core systems," Jax shouted to Mara, who had managed to gather a small group of survivors. "Take out the backup power. Without it, they can't activate their systems. We'll slow them down." Mara hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She turned to the others, rallying them for one final push. But before they could leave, the loud hum of energy weapons cut through the air, followed by the unmistakable voice of an Empire soldier. "Humanity's reign is over," the soldier called out coldly, standing at the far end of the hallway, his weapon raised. "The Empire has returned. There is no place for you in the galaxy anymore." Jax's heart clenched. He didn't know what the Empire was, what its ultimate goal was. But he knew one thing for certain. If they were going to survive, they would have to find out. They had to learn the Empire's weakness and exploit it, or else humanity would fall under its shadow forever. As the first wave of soldiers descended on them, Jax led his team into the heart of the station, determined to resist for as long as he could. The fate of Tesseran Station, of humanity's future, now rested on their ability to fight and survive against an enemy that had been hidden for centuries. The station shuddered as the power systems flickered. Time was running out.